Jill.
Hi.
I see that your roommate went home.
Oh, yes, she left this morning.
And how are you doing?
I'm feeling pretty good today. I'm ready to go home. I just have to get rid of this catheter.
Sit around a little bit.
Oh, sure.
Jill Morin, 46 years old, is 3 days post-operative following a vaginal hysterectomy. An active, outgoing person, Jill is a buyer for a large clothing store. She is a wife and mother of 2 teenagers.
Sounds good to me.
Oh, good.
Let's leave the catheter in a little longer, Jill. Your attempts to go on your own weren't too successful.
Oh. Well, I was really hoping to get it out today.
Well, I think it's best if we give it some more time. Don't worry about it. Just take it easy. I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay. See you tomorrow.
Left to herself, Jill begins to worry, to ask herself questions she cannot answer. Does being unable to urinate mean that the surgery has failed? That she won't be able to go home on Saturday as planned? That she'll always have trouble urinating?
Hello, Mrs. Morin.
Oh, hi.
How are you feeling this morning?
Oh, I guess I'm all right.
Having greeted Mrs. Morin, Mrs. Cross, a staff nurse, perceives a change in her usual mood. Ordinarily, she's pleasant and upbeat, and although she has said she is okay, the tone of her voice and the change in her mood suggest to the nurse that something may be bothering her. By understanding and using techniques of therapeutic communication, the nurse can help patients express themselves so that their needs can be identified and met. Such techniques are not an end in themselves, but are a means by which helpful communication can be promoted. Techniques for encouraging conversation, although they may be employed throughout the interaction, are particularly useful in helping the patient to begin talking and in conveying the nurse's willingness to listen. As Mrs. Cross continues to find Jill Morin quiet and seemingly troubled, she wishes to discover the reason for the change in her behavior and uses a broad opening statement to initiate the conversation.
Is there something bothering you this morning, Mrs. Morin?
The use of a broad opening statement or question allows the patient to set the direction of the conversation and to begin to express herself. Leaving the direction of the conversation up to the patient, the nurse has shown her interest and her willingness to listen.
Oh, it's just me, I guess. It's probably nothing.
Oh?
During the conversation, general leads such as, "Oh? Yes?" or simply, will usually encourage the patient to continue.
Well, I wasn't able to go to the bathroom by myself this morning, and they had to put the catheter back in, and that worries me a little.
You're worried because you can't urinate yet and still have a catheter.
Needing more information than Mrs. Morin is given, the nurse has used reflecting to encourage the patient to expand upon her statement. All or part of the patient's statement is repeated or slightly rephrased. In either form, however, reflecting can be obvious and should be used sparingly.
You see that lady in the next bed, Janice? She had her catheter out in 1 day. And I've had mine in for 3 days now. I don't understand what's gone wrong.
At this point in the interaction, Mrs. Cross has a definite indication that the patient is experiencing anxiety and also what the cause of the anxiety might be. Using a deliberative approach, the nurse will continue to encourage Mrs. Morin to express herself until the nature of her difficulty is more clearly established. In summary, techniques useful in encouraging conversation are broad opening statements to allow the patient to set the direction of the conversation, general leads to encourage her to continue, and reflecting, which, besides encouraging her to continue, may also help her to more fully consider and expand upon her statements. In helping the patient express his thoughts and feelings, the nurse takes a more active role in the conversation. Since this requires a deeper involvement on her part, she must be prepared to accept and cope with the feelings expressed by the patient. Elvin Williams, 31 years old, suffering from acquired immune deficiency syndrome and just recovering from his first bout with pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, is to be discharged tomorrow. Upon discharge, he will be living with his sister and her 2 children.
Are you just gonna stand there? Take this out of here, away from me.
Startled to find herself the target of Mr. Williams' animosity, Mrs. Dunphy, a staff nurse, pauses to consider the situation before responding. Although he has unjustly directed his anger at her, she attempts to neither respond angrily nor make any assumptions regarding him or his behavior, but explores the express source of his complaint.
If the food doesn't taste good to you, I could order something else that you might like.
Don't bother, just get the tray out of here.
Complying with Mr. Williams' wish to have his tray removed, but uncertain that this was the actual cause of his behavior, the nurse remains to give him an opportunity to express his feelings.
You seem to be awfully upset, Mr. Williams.
The nurse shares with the patient her observations regarding his behavior. Such statements, which may focus on either the patient's apparent emotional or physical state, convey to him her concern and her interest in further discussion.
Well, I ought to be. Nobody around here gives a damn what happens.
It must be upsetting to feel that nobody cares.
By acknowledging the patient's feelings, the nurse helps him to know that they are understood and accepted, and encourages him to continue expressing them.
Nobody cares. My doctor, he just wants me to go. Just go on home. He doesn't care.
Go home.
The nurse selects what she thinks to be the most important idea contained in what the patient has said, and reflects this back to him. Mr. Williams has reiterated his statement that no one cares, but he has also introduced a new and perhaps more important topic, his going home.
I can't go home. If I do...
As Mr. Williams stops speaking, Mrs. Dunphy chooses to remain silent, feeling that slowing the pace of the conversation may give him a chance to reflect. Also, silence allows the nurse time to observe the patient for nonverbal cues or to assemble her own thoughts. Remaining attentive so that he will not mistake her silence for indifference or rejection, she communicates her acceptance of his feelings as well as her readiness to continue.
I can't go home with this AIDS. I mean, if they want me out of here so bad, why don't they just let me die?
You can't go home because you have AIDS.
Again, Mrs. Dunphy has responded to the idea she feels is most pertinent. Although she has not taken the patient's mention of dying lightly, it seems to her the less relevant statement at this time.
Well, one of my buddies had AIDS, and his wife got it, and they had a kid, and the kid died from it. How can I go live with my sister? What if her and her kids get it?
You think they'll get the disease from you?
Won't they?
No, Mr. Williams. The disease can only be spread by sexual contact and by sharing blood, like what would be on needles. Just usual family contact with your sister and your nieces won't give them AIDS.
That's what the doctors said. The nurses, too. But what about my friend? What about him giving AIDS to his wife and kids?
Well, he probably had sexual contact with his wife. And mothers can give the disease to their unborn babies. Did your nurse on the day shift give you that pamphlet on home care? It tells how really small the risk to your family is and gives instructions on various aspects of your care so that your sister and her kids would be safe.
Yeah, it's in the drawer. I guess I just didn't understand too well before. I just kept thinking about my friend.
Giving the patient the information to correctly assess his situation may be what is needed in resolving his problem. Even though Mr. Williams' concern was the result of simple misunderstanding, this was not apparent until the nurse helped him express his thoughts and feelings. In summary, techniques for helping a patient express his thoughts and feelings are sharing observations, to make the patient aware of the nurse's perception of his behavior and her desire to help, acknowledging the patient's feelings, to let him know his feelings are understood and accepted. Selective reflecting, to encourage further exploration of the most important of two or more ideas which the patient has expressed. Using silence, to give the patient time to think and the nurse time to observe nonverbals or collect her own thoughts. And giving information, to answer questions or dispel misconception which may help the patient more correctly evaluate his situation. Ensuring mutual understanding is imperative, for words and ideas must have the same meaning for both nurse and patient if communication is to be clear.
Mrs. Karpinski, I see you're still awake. I noticed your light was on while I was making my rounds.
Yes, I guess it's pretty late, isn't it?
Rose Karpinski, 76 years old, had surgery for a ventral hernia 3 days ago. Her discharge from the hospital has been postponed because of a wound infection.
Is there something bothering you, Mrs. Karpinski?
No, I just can't seem to get to sleep. I wish I could get out of bed.
Sensing that the patient is troubled, Ron Wardlow, a staff nurse on the night shift, provides a broad opening statement. While the patient indicated she was not upset, she did express a wish to be out of bed, and it is to this that the nurse responds.
Would you like to sit on the sofa?
Well, it was not too much trouble. You're not too busy?
Oh, no, I've got time. Here, let me get you your robe and your slippers.
By meeting the patient's immediate need, the nurse encourages her to express other needs she may have. In demonstrating his willingness to be of help, the nurse has established an atmosphere which will be conducive to further therapeutic conversation.
I'll help you sit down. You might be a little stiff from lying down so long. Here we go.
Thank you. It's good to be out of bed.
You seem to be a little restless tonight. You often have trouble getting to sleep?
At home I sleep okay. It's just this place. I can't sleep here.
You can't sleep here?
No, I can't. I just...
Yes?
I wish I could go home.
When a patient is crying, the response of the nurse should be determined by the situation and the nurse's assessment of the individual patient. Generally, however, the nurse should avoid focusing directly on the crying, making neither positive nor negative statements regarding it. Remaining silent, the nurse attempts to give nonverbal support. At times, the acceptance conveyed by an empathetic silence can be more comforting than a verbal response.
I'm sorry, but I was supposed to go home tomorrow, and now with this infection, the doctor says I have to stay longer.
Go on.
Oh, I'm not worried about me. It's Charles. He hasn't been the same ever since the accident. And now with me being gone so long, I don't know what he'll do.
Mrs. Karpinski, I'm not sure I follow what you mean.
Because he has not understood the patient's last statement, the nurse immediately attempts to clarify its meaning, thereby lessening the possibility that there will be misunderstanding or ambiguity in the conversation.
Well, my husband Charles had a car accident last year. And he had to give up driving, and ever since he's been so down. I'm really afraid to have him alone for so long.
You're afraid he's going to become more depressed by your long absence?
By verbalizing what seems implied in what Mrs. Karpinski said, the nurse verifies his impression of the patient's meaning. In addition, this may also help the patient to become more fully aware of her own feelings.
Yes, I'm worried about him. But what can I do? We don't have children or relatives close by, and we haven't made many friends since we moved into the mobile home. back home, neighbors would always look out for one another.
You'd like someone to check in on him from time to time?
Yes, but I don't really know anybody who could do that. We're pretty alone now.
Well, I know of 2 service organizations that are available to families. And of course, there's the hospital social worker. She knows of people who make home visits. I could put in a request for the social worker, and I'll be sure the day shift knows about this.
Well, okay, all right. I really would like to talk to someone.
Even when a problem appears resolved, however, the nurse should attempt to make sure this is actually the case.
I'll leave note with the day shift that you'd like to talk to the social worker tomorrow. Perhaps she can make arrangements for someone to check in on your husband. And at least she'll know of somebody else who could help. You feel a little better now?
In validating, he gives Mrs. Karpinski an opportunity to express any reservations or further needs she may have.
Well, I guess so. But I should be home with him. I'm not sure I'll like it if strangers are checking in on him.
If the patient's reply suggests her need has not been completely met, the nurse should renew efforts to assist her.
You're still a little uneasy about being here, aren't you?
Yes, I am. It would have been so much better if I could have gone home when I was supposed to.
It must be tough on you being separated, knowing the problems that he's going through.
Yes. But I guess I can't be with Charles right now. Do you think the people that look in on him will check to see if he's eating okay? I left some food, but I don't know if he's been eating it.
Well, I know that that's one of the things we could talk to the social worker about.
I guess I am relieved that someone's going to check on Charles while I'm gone. The social worker will come up tomorrow?
I'll leave word tonight that you'd like to see that social worker as soon as possible in the morning.
When a patient becomes upset, she may at times, like Mrs. Karpinski, have difficulty making herself clear. In such situations, by ensuring mutual understanding, the nurse can promote meaningful communication.
Thanks for everything. And would you mind turning my light off? I think I'll try to sleep now.
In summary, techniques useful for ensuring mutual understanding are clarifying, to attempt to make meaning clear in order to avoid misunderstanding; verbalizing implied thoughts and feelings, to verify the nurse's impression of implied meaning and to help the patient become more aware of her own feelings; and validating, to check with the patient that her need has or has not been met. As the nurse understands the various techniques which promote therapeutic communication and consciously employs them, as she gradually becomes skilled in their use, adapting them to her own particular personality and style of interacting, communication becomes for her an art, and she is increasingly able to interact meaningfully with her patients, to identify and meet their needs through a therapeutic approach.